Atlus went on a generational run in 2024. Between developing Persona 3 Reload, Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, and publishing Unicorn Overlord, they've clearly been busy over the past decade. Developing JRPGs, especially when compared to other games, is an arduous task. Creating a compelling world, developing a striking art style, writing thousands of lines of dialogue, an engaging story, and developing mechanics for players to engage with is something Atlus has been doing for over 30 years now. Most studios release games of these sizes once every 5 to 10 years, however, Atlus somehow released 2 of them. Regardless of how you feel about these games critically, I think we can all appreciate their output in 2024 given the scope of these projects. Nevertheless, Atlus saved their most anticipated release for October 11th, Metaphor ReFantazio. Metaphor, previously revealed as Project ReFantazio, was Atlus's grand finale to their 2024 run, and this game has taken the world by storm. Metaphor has been a critical and commercial success, won several awards at the Game Awards, and it feels like everyone just loves this game. Something that stands out to me personally that I really want to praise is that it's a brand new IP. We live in a world filled with remakes, remasters, reboots, and re-releases. I shouldn't have to celebrate this, but especially in 2024, it takes a lot of courage to create a brand new IP that isn't tied to a pre-existing or long-running franchise. Because of rising development costs, publishers tend to shy away from trying new things. Metaphor, unlike Persona, isn't a spin-off of Shin Megami Tensei. It's something fresh that longtime Atlus fans have yearned for. I was obviously excited for Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, and I never thought Persona 3 needed a remake since Portable was now accessible, but Metaphor ReFantazio was easily my most anticipated Atlus release of 2024. Fast forward to September 25th, and the Metaphor demo was released. I remember playing it and not really being too impressed. I'm personally not a huge fan of the high fantasy setting, the opening hours failed to grab me, the game shared a lot of DNA with Persona, and I realized the game probably just wasn't for me. Ready to write this game off as just not for me, Sega provided the channel with a review code, and that brings us to today. In today's video, I'd like to provide a critical overview of Metaphor and discuss my complicated relationship with it. Before getting started, let's establish a few ground rules. The following video contains full spoilers for Metaphor ReFantazio. This game is best experienced blind, and I recommend playing it before watching this video. Lastly, the opinions stated in this video are entirely my own. I streamed most of Metaphor on my Twitch channel, so feel free to stop by if you'd like to catch the show live. Also, and it's surreal to say this honestly, thank you Sega and Atlus for providing the channel with a review code, and a huge shout out to you watching or listening to the video. It may be because I'm writing this video at the end of the year, but I can't help but feel grateful. When I first started this channel, I never imagined anyone would actually care about what I had to say. Being in this position is a privilege, and I want to sincerely thank everyone for allowing me to be here. Whether we've had discussions in the comments, you stopped by the stream, messaged me on social media, or are active in the Discord server, thank you so much for making this dream a reality. And while I'm grateful to receive a code and be in this position, this channel is built on integrity. Sharing my honest thoughts and constructive criticisms are what I've aspired to do on this channel. Incorporating feedback is how artists improve, and I'd feel disingenuous if I reserved any of my thoughts simply because I received a review code from one of my favorite publishers. In today's video, I'd like to document my journey with Metaphor ReFantazio. I'd like to discuss whether the 8-year wait was worth it, if this game proudly stands as a new pillar, and whether enough was added to step out of Shin Megami Tensei's and Persona's shadow. This is Metaphor ReFantazio, a step in place. With the exception of Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance, I've been playing catch-up with Atlus's games on this channel. SMT5 Vengeance has incredible graphics, music, art direction, and overall presentation, but Persona 5 and 3 Reload reside in a tier above the rest. It's easy to forget or take for granted how visually appealing Atlus's UI and art direction are, especially if you haven't played Persona 5 Royal since 2020. Metaphor serves as a triumphant reminder why Atlus's UI is the industry's finest. Whether exploring a dungeon, engaging in a boss fight, leveling up your royal attributes, or simply changing equipment, Metaphor's UI is just breathtaking. If you're watching this video, you've probably played a lot of Atlus's games, and while it's easy to become numb to this or take it for granted, I'd like to spend a few minutes highlighting the dedication and hard work Atlus provides artistically and functionally. As alluded to earlier, every second of this game is highly stylized and visually stimulating. Most developers, if they get this far, typically stop after creating this UI, but Atlus went above and beyond by making it functionally intuitive. Traversing menus, tabbing between characters, pulling up maps, quality of life changes, and everything in between just transitions so seamlessly. Instead of choosing between form or function, Metaphor rejects this notion by asking us, why do you have to choose? Atlus is well known for leaning into its captivating art direction, and well, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, then a video must be worth 1,000. I don't really know where I'm going with this, but you get the point. In today's industry, publishers and developers have reached this irrational conclusion that players only want photorealistic graphics. However, I've always been drawn to a more stylized presentation rather than the more contemporary Western aesthetic, which is just photorealism. This is all subjective, of course, but I've always been a big fan of Japan's dedication to presentation, art direction, music, and this never-ending pursuit of creating art in motion. Metaphor's characters are striking, the portraits are gorgeous, and each of the cities look great while brimming with life and identity. Instead of only praising Shigenori Sojimo's character artwork, I'd like to extend this praise to Atlus's entire art team. Everyone did a remarkable job with everything. Speaking of staff, let's talk about Shoji Meguro and his musical contributions with Metaphor. When Shoji Meguro announced that he was leaving Atlus in 2021, I thought his quality may suffer since he'd be employed as a contractor, and I'm more than happy to be proven wrong. Similar to Strange Journey's soundtrack, Metaphor features an orchestral score with a heavy focus on choir vocals. As we learned from our Strange Journey video, Meguro believes soundtracks are meant to echo the themes, tone, and atmosphere a piece of media is attempting to convey. Metaphor's soundtrack captures this high-stakes, content-wide race to the throne. There's a familiar feverish excitement to battle themes, and cities surrounding the royal capital are accompanied with tracks foreshadowing future plot events. And while I enjoyed Metaphor's soundtrack quite a bit, I wasn't crazy about it overall. Music, like games, movies, books, comics, and everything we call art, is highly subjective. Ever since I was a kid playing Kingdom Hearts and other Square Enix games, I've fallen in love with orchestral music. Nevertheless, there's something about this soundtrack that just never really clicked with me. When I'm in the middle of playing or beat an Atlus game, my first instinct always is to buy or stream the soundtrack. Listening to Metaphor's soundtrack throughout my playthrough never elicited this feeling out of me. I never caught myself humming a track or listening to anything on repeat. I don't know, this soundtrack may grow on me over time, but as of writing this video, I much prefer Meguro's haunting orchestral take with Strange Journey. That said, both of these soundtracks are good and fit the themes of their respective games. Metaphor's soundtrack is good and I'm sure plenty of people love it, but it just never really resonated with me like his other works. Something that did click with me, however, is Metaphor's remarkable gameplay. Longtime Atlus fans will feel right at home since Metaphor incorporates Persona 3's calendar system. Players will find themselves balancing royal virtues, main story quests, side quests, spending time with their followers, and exploring dungeons. Royal virtues, similar to attributes found in Persona games, eat a lot of time as players are forced to level these up if they want to meet new followers or progress specific quests. Leveling these up, no matter how many times I play Persona, is always a pain, yet Metaphor probably has the best implementation of these. Although you're still prohibited from events if your stats are too low, Metaphor integrates a ton of world building into these activities now. Instead of studying at your desk to increase your academics, you'll partake in a debate about economics, learn about Mustari culture, listen to the concerns of people, or understand how faith and culture have shaped the world. Are these events still a means to an end? Absolutely. However, Metaphor's world is so fully realized that Atlus has meaningfully transformed these laborious events into activities I was legitimately excited to do. I enjoy these events so much that I'd probably do them even if they weren't tied to any character progression. Listening to characters of different races talk about their history and how they endeavor to survive illustrates how much sanctism, the world, and their culture has shaped their lives. One of my favorite examples was speaking with a Mustari woman in Matera. In 2 minutes, she describes sanctism, the church, how her faith contrasts Sancta's beliefs, and the ramifications of forcing religious values onto the public. This conversation was surprisingly nuanced and really caught me off guard when I simply wanted to become more open-minded. Furthermore, all the royal virtues thematically harmonize with the narrative as you're challenged to become a virtuous leader. In addition to broadening your horizons, this game is also, well, a video game, so you're expected to progress the story, and Metaphor's story finds you crawling dungeons. Metaphor's dungeons can be bifurcated into 2 categories, story dungeons and side quest dungeons. The story dungeons have different gimmicks, loot to discover, unique music, and distinct aesthetics setting them apart. These dungeons were designed around forcing players to ration magic, resources, and level up their archetypes. Although none of these dungeons are exceptionally large, they are dense and take time to get through. Balancing resources, advancing archetypes, and figuring out a path forward provides Metaphor with a dungeon crawling identity of which I'm a big fan of. If Atlus has been working on this game since 2016, and since Persona and Shin Megami Tensei have migrated away from dungeons, Metaphor's dungeon exploration felt like meeting an old friend. The only area of criticism I have is with the size of these dungeons. I wish these dungeons were a bit larger in scope, but I guess this is where the side quest dungeons come into play. Whenever you receive a bounty or some side quests, you'll be assigned a location to slay the monster. These locations range from forests to dungeons and are reused throughout the game. These dungeons reuse the same tracks, gimmicks, and they're even smaller when compared to the main story dungeons, and frankly, I think this is perfectly acceptable. Expecting a studio to make new dungeons for every mini-boss or quest is absurd. However, I do have a small list of changes that may provide some life into these. In these areas, enemies drop equipment, items, and other loot. All enemies have rare loot that they drop, so why not lean into this more? Similar to Persona 3's Tartarus, why not randomize the levels every time you return to the entrance? If Atlas randomizes the level structure and enemy spawn locations, I believe these areas will feel a bit less bland, especially if you're grinding out archetypes in them. That said, I'm not a game designer and I have no idea how much this would actually cost, so maybe it's unrealistic. All in all, I think Atlas did a good job with the main story and side quest dungeons. Reusing side quest dungeons are fine, but they'd be perfect if they were just a little bit more dynamic in my opinion. But what do you think? Good? Bad? Let's talk about it more in the comments below. An area I have nothing but praise for is the overworld combat. I was planning on opening this next section with an anecdote, but I'm sure most of us have played a lot of RPGs. I'm sure we all know the pain of grinding fights for an item or leveling up a neglected party member for a battle. Instead of reveling in this monotony, Metaphor allows us to fight low-level enemies with some basic hack-and-slash combat. This is a brilliant and engaging way of tackling this monotony. The UI is also really helpful since it displays everything you need, like items picked up, when new moves are learned, archetype level, and more. Now, it's strange saying this, but I have to shout it out. Metaphor's overworld combat's camera is actually good. When playing Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, the Souls games, or really any action game, the camera is almost always rough at some point. I'm happy to report that Metaphor's camera rarely gave me any problems. It's a small thing, but you'd be surprised how many action game developers really struggle with this. Seeing Atlas just nail the overworld camera when they don't even make action games is pretty crazy. The only minor nitpicks I have are with the lock-on system and the weapon variety. If the lock-on icon was a bit larger and changing locked-on enemies was a bit more responsive, it'd be perfect. When it comes to weapon variety, each archetype uses one of a handful of weapons. This isn't really a criticism because I understand why they did this, but it'd be nice if we could choose which weapons we used in the overworld combat. I'd be throwing daggers and knives the entire game if it was my choice. It'd be super cool if we had combos, but I know that I'm starting to reach. Getting back on topic, the overworld combat is great and I can't wait to see them expand it. Nevertheless, everything changes when encountering an enemy at your level or above, but before discussing the core combat system, we must talk about Metaphor's standout feature, archetypes. So I'll be honest, Metaphor was my first time playing a game with the job system. I'm sharing this because I can't critically assess or compare Metaphor systems to other games like Bravely Default, Final Fantasy V, or Octopath Traveler to name a few. As a critic, reviewer, content creator, opinion discusser, whatever this channel is, I think someone who shares their opinions should have a lot of experience with mechanics or systems. Credibility in this whole video essay space comes from experiencing a ton of games and critically engaging with them. Despite my juvenile perspective, and regardless of how many refinements or how much new Metaphor brings to the metaphorical job system table, I had a lot of fun with it. As you progress the story and meet new friends and followers, players will unlock archetypes to use in battle. Each archetype bolsters a suite of skills ranging from buffs, passives, and various skills. You'll unlock more skills as you level up archetypes, but this is where things get interesting. Instead of simply leveling up an archetype and gaining access to all of their skills, all the party members must level them up independently. Just because the main character has Magic Secret max rank doesn't mean that everyone will. Furthermore, characters will master skills as they level up archetypes. Mastered skills can be inherited and used across other archetypes, which is where the system, in my opinion, really shines. Lastly, players can leverage synthesis skills where party members with specific archetypes combine their abilities to cast powerful spells. Synthesis skills are a lot of fun to use since they reward players for deliberate team composition. Atlas did a fantastic job rebalancing Metaphor's combat around archetype compatibility and synthesis skills as well. Instead of simply unlocking Bufu, Mabufu, Bufula, and so on, AoE skills like Mabufu are initially locked behind synthesis skills, and when you do unlock AoE skills later, you'll have a suite of powerful new synthesis skills to use. Anyways, I just wanted to quickly outline the importance of archetypes since they play such a pivotal role in Metaphor's combat. And if you know anything about Atlas, which most of you probably do, you'll know that Atlas's core combat system is great, so let's talk about the other half of Metaphor's combat. Metaphor employs Shin Megami Tensei's patented press turn combat system. Now, I've spoken at length about the genius of the system across multiple videos, however, Metaphor provides a few refinements to really shake things up. In addition to the game changers known as archetypes, Metaphor adds rows for party members to alternate between, AoE skills are now tied to synthesis, and the unscathed triumph mechanic. Parallel to archetypes in team composition exist rows. Party members in the front row will receive more damage while dealing more physical damage, and vice versa for party members in the back row. While this may sound like a relatively minor addition, Metaphor goes one step further by changing how enemies and certain bosses respond to how your team is assembled. There are numerous bounties who receive damage buffs, enhanced evasion, and more if you have party members with certain archetypes and or row composition. Sure, you can power through these fights, but it would be in your best interest to respect them because Metaphor can actually be a challenging game at times. Metaphor also features some incredible quality of life changes like the retry feature. Instead of rushing through turns to die because you already lost the battle, players can simply press L3 or left stick if they want to retry the battle. The retry feature, like adding turbo to 90s turn-based games, is a huge game changer. I wish you could hold a button and have a menu with your party and archetypes show up before retrying the battle. If Atlas added this in a small update, this retry feature would be perfect. Something else that I adore about Metaphor is how Atlas handled the overall difficulty. When playing turn-based games on harder difficulties, developers usually default to enemies hitting harder and providing less experience points. Turn-based games are built on rules and RNG. If you're playing a game like Devil May Cry on a harder difficulty, enemies receive additional attacks, more health, and sometimes even devil triggers, creating a more challenging experience. These additional mechanics force players to become even more intimate with enemy attacks, defensive options, and further engage with the game. Turn-based games, conversely, don't have as many mechanics to play around with. Outside of increasing enemy damage and decreasing experience gain, developers have historically had a hard time creating well-balanced difficulties. And if you don't believe me, look at all the challenge runs for Persona and SMT games on the hardest difficulties. In an attempt to add more meaningful difficulty, Atlas provided enemies with an additional press turn icon when playing on hard mode. While this may sound like a minute adjustment, this extra turn will be the reason you die, makes getting ambushed absolutely terrifying, and can change the way you engage with combat. This will definitely be solved in time, but this extra turn makes hard mode fun if you're a Mega 10 veteran. I love how this change makes the game harder instead of forcing players to grind like most turn-based hard modes do. Too much grinding makes your game monotonous and not harder. Anyways, I just wanted to quickly mention this because I thought it was great game design. The final area of gameplay I'd like to discuss are the side quests. If you've seen my previous videos, you'll know that I think side quests are important because they can be used for world building, and fortunately, Metaphor has some incredible side quests. Metaphor's side quests flesh out the world and highlights how different races struggle to survive. We experience how discrimination impacts races, cultural differences prohibit understanding of others, and how misinterpreting history has lasting ramifications on society. Side quests will occasionally provide you with royal virtue points as well. All in all, Metaphor's side quests are great and should be the standard for Atlas moving forward. An area I can't shower with praise unfortunately with is the story. Well, at least half of it. While I adore the themes Metaphor tackles, the overall execution leaves something to be desired. Before discussing the narrative shortcomings, I'd like to remind everyone that if you're enjoying the video, a subscription and a like would go a far way in helping the channel grow. Thank you for your support, and back to the video. Alright, let's get something out of the way. The high fantasy setting isn't my cup of tea. Most high fantasy stories I've seen are coming-of-age stories or a hero's journey. While these stories are timeless, they're pretty rigid in structure. The dark fantasy setting, by comparison, is great for subverting player expectations, telling morally gray narratives, possess more captivating factions, and allow writers to explore whatever they want. And with that said, Metaphor really surprised me as the game progressed after 40 hours. One aspect of Atlas's games I've been critical of is with their openings. I plan on dedicating a discussion video to this one day, but Atlas frequently struggles to hook players in its opening hours, and Metaphor might be the worst offender here. It might have been the high fantasy setting, but I just wasn't engaged in the drama. Lewis initially comes off as one-dimensional, and the ongoing plot with the king and the curse never really grabbed me. Lewis is a tyrant who does bad things, but I don't care about the citizens, world, or much of anything until arriving in Port Brilehaven. Personally, I don't think the opening hours do an effective job demonstrating why we should be invested in the world. There wasn't this emotional pull other than bad things happen in a bad world. The mystery that kept me coming back was the fantasy novel the main character had. Depicting our world as this perfect fantasy that the cast desperately wants to escape to was fascinating. I found myself interested in the philosophy this book preached and more curious of who the author was. Romanticizing an ideal version of our world while contrasting it with metaphors was quite compelling and had me curious. Another area the opening hours really suffer with is exposition. Let's use this scene as an example. After being jumped by Lewis's zealots, joining the army, formally meeting Stroll, being sent to our deaths by the military, and escaping the Nord mines with Grius, we get this minute-and-a-half scene recapping these events. Like, why? These events happened 8 hours ago. I understand the crew went through a traumatic experience, but recapping the opening and adding people live in echo chambers feels contrived. At this point in the narrative, players have seen the opening cutscene, experienced the world's discrimination, learned about Stroll's upbringing, and have seen the prince get cursed. Metaphor very clearly demonstrates that everyone has a different perspective. At this point, you're probably thinking to yourself, why are you spending so much time on this brief minute-and-a-half scene? Well, opening hours and an engaging hook are important. Hooks are hard, and there's something I'm personally working on with my videos, but Atlus has a history of consistently struggling with these. If you don't effectively intrigue viewers, present an interesting mystery, or hook players immediately, you run the risk of making Persona 4, Shin Megami Tensei 4, and now Metaphor ReFantazio. I remember trying Persona 4 Golden back in 2013 and dropping the game because I was bored out of my mind in the opening. Now, handhelds in the PS Vita aren't the most ergonomically friendly systems, and I was probably 16 when I tried the game, but Persona 4's opening was the reason I dropped it in the first place. Eventually, I revisited the game, fell in love with it, and beat it, but first impressions matter. And to bring this full circle, scenes like these being littered throughout the opening hours really doesn't help the pacing. Atlus's games and many other JRPGs for that matter sometimes feel the need to recap events that happened like an hour ago. This issue can be best explained with a brief anecdote. If someone spills a drink in real life, what is your first response? Do you A, tell them that they spilled the drink, or B, immediately help clean them up? While B sounds like the obvious choice, Atlus, Square Enix, Bandai Namco, and other JRPG developers will choose option A every single time. Removing scenes like this throughout the story would have done wonders for Metaphor's pacing. Opening hours, a hook, writing, and pacing are paramount when telling a story. I vehemently disagree with the notion of powering through opening hours because of the, and I quote, "it gets better" argument. When everyone agrees the opening hours of a game, first couple of episodes, or seasons of a show have to be powered through, your story, regardless of how much I enjoyed the second half, has a serious problem. Interesting foreshadowing, esoteric hints, a twist reconceptualizing the opening hours, or removing scenes that don't contribute to character development or world building would have done wonders for the pacing. Creating a story is hard, and delivering a story in a succinct manner is even harder. Writers walk a fine balance of informing viewers while moving the plot forward. When this isn't done correctly, you run the risk of losing viewers' attention, insult their media literacy, and/or writing potentially bloated dialogue, and Metaphor, unfortunately, really suffers with this not only in the opening hours, but also throughout the game. Nevertheless, when you reach Brawlhaven, a lot of these issues begin to fade away. After joining Lewis's crew and infiltrating his gauntlet runner, we discover Lewis is also in possession of the fantasy novel, Juna's been spying on him, and things get even more interesting when stumbling upon the remnants of mankind in the Dragon Temple's basement. Virga Island is probably the best written area in the game. Traversing the Mystari's country finds us learning more about their cultural beliefs, has a ton of great world building, incredible drama driven by great character development, and alludes to many of the overarching themes Metaphor attempts to convey. One of the many reasons Metaphor failed to intrigue me early on was because of Lewis. Lewis, up to the Virga Island, for me personally, felt like a one-dimensional mustache-twirling villain. Now, I'm all for pandemonium and ignorance as much as the next person, but I was never sold on Lewis being this master tactician until spending time with his crew. Listening to their ferocious stories and experiencing how ruthlessly calculated Lewis can be finally makes the antagonist feel like an antagonist. He's clearly capable and most likely planning something, but I wasn't really sold on Lewis until reaching Altbury 50 hours later. Since we're talking about Lewis, Metaphor's main cast of characters are outstanding. Many of your followers are products of the world, highlighting the oppressive nature of their institutions. In addition to follower events fleshing out the cast, they're constantly challenged by world events and are often introspective when experiencing things that resonate with them. Overall, Atlas did an outstanding job writing everyone, especially Brigitte, Heisme, Stroll, Barden, and Yufa. As we spend more time with the cast, not only do we uncover how sinister Metaphor's world is, but also see how it's impacted them. Spending time with them, conversing with NPCs, and leveling up your royal virtues transforms Metaphor's high fantasy world into this terrifying theocracy. In the beginning of this section, I described Metaphor's world as bad people doing bad things, but as the game gradually reveals, let's try that again. As the game very slowly reveals itself during the opening 50 to 60 hours, I found myself becoming more invested in this world's drama. 60 hours later, I finally wanted to learn more about Lewis, why the church framed him, how to stop him, and I wanted to save the world by becoming the king. All of this newfound excitement unfortunately came with the new revelation. I'm halfway through the game, and I wish I didn't feel this way because, in my opinion, Metaphor's second half is much better than the first half. Discovering the church's conspiracy, providing Lewis with some much needed development, explaining Huma and Elda origins, and moving the plot forward while tackling interesting themes brought a newfound sense of excitement to the game. Lewis felt like a nuanced villain who lost his way. Given the circumstances, I actually feel bad and sympathize for him. Lewis, like everyone else in the cast, is a byproduct of everything wrong with Metaphor's world. The king and the church's leadership established this societal hierarchy, leading to global unrest and tension between the races. Yielding knowledge of human origins, being born in the crosshairs of Fortin's ambitions, and simply existing in this world prompts Lewis to reject the current world order and strives to revert things back to their primordial origins. Challenging the status quo isn't inherently a bad thing. Many active governance structures we have today are the byproduct of endless debate. Hours of revision, feedback, and collaborating with a wide variety of perspectives are how we discover the best solutions. Lewis's perspective not only rejects this collaborative mindset, but also serves as an excellent juxtaposition to everything the cast is meant to represent. Metaphor's story finds the main character embarking on an adventure where he experiences the shortcomings of the king's legislation, learns the true nature of faith, the importance of challenging your morals by consulting with a diverse range of opinions, and what it means to be truly virtuous. While not telling the player this directly, this juxtaposition is on full display when comparing your crew to Lewis's crew. In the beginning of the game, you meet Stroll in the army, Hulkenberg when she's trying to save civilians, confront Heisme for allegedly abducting children, and so on. As the game progresses and you meet other party members, they all hail from different races who've encountered a variety of adversity. Stroll understands the privilege she was given being born a noble and wants to help others. Basilio has a tragic past, serving as an example of what life can be in this world, and Yufa experiences different cultures while questioning the role of faith in the broader society. None of your party members were vetted or joined under some preconceived notions other than Fidelio and Basilio. Each of them joined because you wanted to help them. Lewis, by comparison, couldn't be further apart. In addition to Lewis's army members, Zorba, Fidelio, Basilio, and Juno were initially his party members. Instead of valuing them for the quality of their character, everyone is viewed as serving a purpose. Zorba is a Lewis extremist who can't fathom destroying a painting of him. Basilio and Fidelio support him because they believe they share a vision of the world together, and Juno joins to investigate him. However, Lewis couldn't care less as to why they joined. Instead of discussing his ideals and the best way to bring about change, he simply needs their power to execute his vision. This short-sightedness is why 3 of the 4 party members eventually defect to your crew or die for what they believe in. Atlas could have easily written Lewis to be a one-man army powerful enough to bring about his vision, yet they provided him with the crew to drive home the importance of what it means to be virtuous. Lewis's characterization, ambition, and the way he treats his crew elevates him from a one-dimensional villain to a perfect antithesis to not only you and your friends, but also the themes Metaphor has been preaching. Although Metaphor's story takes place in a high fantasy setting, it closely mimics and has a lot to say about our world today. One of my favorite things about this game, and why I implore you to play it regardless of my thoughts, is because of how thematically relevant the narrative is today. This game tackles a ton of thought-provoking themes like discrimination, propaganda, epistemological beliefs, censoring the past, misinterpreting the history, the dangers of misinformation, to the foundational role of sovereignty and government. The game even acknowledges this parallel by offering the main character a way out of this world into the fantasy world meant to represent where we live. However, instead of joining this new world with possibility, Metaphor allows us to reject it entirely. Something Metaphor challenges its players with, in my understanding at least, is to not give in to despair. Metaphor demonstrates why we should be optimistic about the future and encourages us to tackle the world's problems together. It's a story that rejects isolationism. It's a story that promotes altruism and unification. Sure, one person can't make a change, but if we're willing to discuss our differences while atoning for the sins of the past, maybe, just maybe, there's a brighter future on the horizon. And while I'd love to end this video here, there's an elephant in the room that I unfortunately have to address before ending this video. My relationship with this game, quite frankly, has been a roller coaster to say the least. The demo didn't grab my attention, but that describes my relationship with a lot of Atlus's games, so I just powered through. Eventually, I found myself invested in the world, character, and drama, but I can't ignore powering through 40 hours of fluff for an incredible second half. Nevertheless, the more I played, the more surprised I was by the striking resemblance Metaphor had with Atlus's other IPs. There's been a recurring criticism from Atlus's community that all their games are either Persona or Shin Megami Tensei, and unfortunately, Metaphor falls into this by suffering with a bit of an identity crisis. Metaphor pioneers archetypes, makes minor combat adjustments, takes place in a new setting, and brought dungeons back to the formula. Outside of these changes, royal virtues, the calendar system, followers, follower skills, press turn combat, art direction, and more are recycled from existing IPs. I'm going to echo something I said in my SMT5 video right now. Other than SMT5, which introduced an engaging open level design, a plethora of gameplay refinements, and tying character progression to exploration, Atlus's recent titles have me a bit concerned. More specifically, I hope they're learning the right lessons from their newfound success. Soul Hackers 2 had an interesting story and decent characters, but the dungeons were rudimentary, the Soul Matrix was the Soul Matrix, the side quests dragged on, and they included social links. Persona 3 Reload, which I still haven't played, appears to have lost its atmosphere, gameplay identity, and its aesthetic has been streamlined to fit into Persona 5's tone. And now, Metaphor ReFantazio arguably suffers the most since many of its mechanics originate from a game that's almost 20 years old. Nothing is inherently wrong with borrowing mechanics from other successful IPs, but doing so runs the risk of homogenizing your products. The best example of this can be seen with the MCU, since most of the characters are written to fit within Disney's framework. Whenever a successful piece of media is released, industry analysts, senior leadership, and shareholders try to understand why it was successful. After theorizing the reasons for success, these reasons evolve into a set of criteria which companies build their future products around. Before Marvel movies enter pre-production, studios are given guidelines of everything to include in these movies. Unfortunately, these expectations prevent writers from properly exploring characters like they do in the comics. This results in similar humor, formulaic writing, interchangeable choreography, plot points, and the works. While Atlus wasn't doing financially well in the early to mid 2000s, they threw everything at the wall and took risks, resulting in the Digital Devil Saga duology, the Raito games, Nocturne, Persona 3, Devil Survivor, Strange Journey, and more. While most of these games failed to meet Atlus's commercial goals, each of them had a unique identity with a cult following. Today, with the exception of SMT5, Persona 5 feels like the template many of Atlus's modern games originate from. To be clear, companies need to remain profitable, and Atlus's output in the 2000s was a product of desperation. With video game budgets ballooning and studios being shut down after releasing a bad game, it makes sense why you'd leverage aesthetics and mechanics from your most successful IPs. As I said earlier, borrowing mechanics is perfectly fine, but game designers should be able to take risks. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating for the throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach, but aspiring developers brimming with innovation and new ideas should be able to explore. Embarking on new mechanics and taking creative liberties is how Persona 3, Nocturne, and other highly influential Atlus classics came to be. Then again, Persona 3 Reload is one of Atlus's fastest selling games ever, more Persona remakes are apparently on the horizon, and Metaphor has been universally praised by everyone, so this might be one of those old man screaming at the clouds types of moments. As of writing this video, I think longtime Atlus fans can be set in one of two buckets. You either love this game and are optimistic for the future, or you see their games becoming more and more homogenized. While I definitely enjoyed Metaphor to an extent, I sincerely don't think enough was added to provide this game with its own identity. Nevertheless, all of this criticism comes from someone who's played a ton of Atlus's releases and a few of their classics. If you haven't played Persona 3, 4, and 5 or any Megaten games, this game may be what Persona 5 was to me in 2017, a gateway into Atlus's incredible library. Metaphor offers a thought-provoking narrative with some incredible characters and a fully realized world that's fun to explore. And as much as I'd love to recommend this game despite my criticisms, I can't, in good faith at least, recommend a game that will almost certainly be optional obsolete in a few years. Longtime Atlas fans know they like to release enhanced re-releases after a few years. These new re-releases typically include rebalanced combat, new characters, extra dungeons, new endings, and just more content. Unless Sega plans to change things up, we'll probably have a new version of Metaphor to purchase in the future. Unless there's an upgrade pass to the new version, a season pass with all the new content, or you're just dying to play this game, I'd sit tight for a few years. And worst case scenario, you'll probably find the game for $20 while you clean up your backlog. Whether or not this game provides enough to shake up the formula will be a topic of debate for years to come, but at the end of the day, Metaphor ReFantazio is a solid game despite my reservations with it. While I definitely had a fun time playing it and fell in love with the world and its characters, longtime fans of Atlas will inevitably encounter this sense of déjà vu, and whether you ultimately like or love this game will entirely be up to you. Alright, it's the best time to record the outro, which is first thing in the morning, but thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. Really appreciate everyone for making it this far. And another huge shout out to Sega for providing the channel with a review code. Like I said earlier, I'm shocked that I'm even here, that I made it this far. Be sure to also follow me on Twitch if you'd like to catch the show live. We have a ton of fun over on Twitch all the time. I usually announce when I'm streaming on Twitter, Blue Sky, or Discord, so feel free to join wherever. Shout out to my channel members and Twitch subscribers for supporting my creative endeavors. Really appreciate every one of you guys. Seriously, thank you. And if you'd like, please consider becoming a channel member or Twitch subscriber, where you'll receive early video access, a special Discord role, access to my scripts and outlines, emotes, and more. A couple of questions to close out this video. So what did you guys think of Metaphor? Was I too critical on this game? Do you feel like the beginning dragged? Did the setting hook you? Was enough added to Metaphor to make it really feel like a brand new IP? Which games would you like to see Atlas re-release in the future? And what do you think Atlas is going to call Metaphor's re-release? I have a few smaller non-Atlas related projects, like discussions like my Remedy video and stuff that I want to put out next, so hopefully everyone's excited for those. And again, thank you so much for watching. Feel free to join the Discord, follow the Twitch, and I will catch you guys later.